Perfect.
Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. John Knight, veterinary surgeon to Guernsey and Alderney and to the world. John, good to see you.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
It's good. It's good to see you. And we're going to talk about your career because it's not just cats and dogs. It's very, very varied. So, first thoughts about being a vet. How old were you then?
Ooh, seven, I think.
Yeah, and what
I
influenced you?
and I started seeing practice at about the same sort of time.
Yeah.
My father was into animal welfare. He taught animal welfare in agricultural schools in Africa,
Hmm.
and then in veterinary college in Zambia. But I started sort of thinking about being a vet from about seven, and I didn't really change after that.
So all the way through school, university. What about the training? It's quite a long session, isn't it? Compared with a doctor, a doctor dealing with
Well,
humans.
no, I would. It's not. It's not. It's about the same sort of time.
Hmm.
It's 5 years for a vet. For most people, some people do a little bit extra on top. I went and did some agriculture to start with,
Yeah.
and then went on to veterinary school.
Hmm. And so, having qualified, your first job was, at all places, Yateley in Hampshire, a place I know fairly well.
Yes, it was. They were very good to me. I didn't last very long, unfortunately, but it was a very, I mean, I don't say unfortunately in any bad sense, because it was at the time that I was there, the London Zoo job was advertised.
Mm.
Um, and I was enjoying small animal practice and doing some work with sort of interesting other people in laboratories and so on as well, or starting to do that. And then this job at London Zoo was advertised, and I was lucky. I was brought up in Africa. I'd had lots of unusual pets. I was interested in wildlife. When I was studying at London, I spent a lot of my time in the zoo as a student, not studying veterinary science so much as just the digestive systems of animals and watching things work and how animals behaved and so on in the zoo environment. And so I was in Yateley for probably about 5 or 6 months, and the zoo
Yeah.
job was advertised. And after thinking about it, and I thought to myself, I'd better just check my bosses would be happy. So I went and saw them and said, "This has been advertised. Perhaps I should go for it. If I don't, there's nothing wrong with the job that you've got. I'm enjoying it, but this job doesn't come up very often." So I applied for it at that point and drove up on the very last day, put my CV on the desk of the establishments officer, HR now, I guess.
Yeah, I
But
guess so.
and then went driving home and got offered an interview that evening and went up and got the job.
That's excellent. And of course, it doesn't just embrace the Regent's Park facility, does it? You've also got Whipsnade thrown in as well.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah,
I was primarily at Regent's Park, but I also did work at Whipsnade as well.
yeah. How did you find it as a change from the training on small animals?
Oh, it's similar but very different too. So in the zoo, you've got to think about, how are you going to handle the animal? If you do handle it, what's the risk of handling it, both to yourself, but importantly to the animal itself and to
Yeah.
the group of animals that you are going to have to invade to extract it from? And then are you actually going to be able to get it back again afterwards? Because by the time you've removed it from the social hierarchy, you've then got to re-establish it back into that social hierarchy, and it will smell different. Perhaps it will have lost its position. Some species, particularly some of the smaller species, the position in the society is juggled all the time, and you only need to take them out for an hour or two, and it can change.
So
Um,
is that apparent, is it, as far as animals are concerned,
yeah,
in terms of the hierarchy?
it makes it's not necessarily an obvious hierarchy, but there will be a hierarchy,
Yeah.
and where your animal is within it will possibly change. So by putting it back, you then cause disturbance, risk of injuries, all those sort of things that go with it.
What sort of treatment did you have to give them at London Zoo? All sorts, presumably.
Anything that you can think of in small animal practice or large animal practice or human medicine
Yeah.
might have had to happen there. So when I went, I was there for probably about 10 days, and my boss left to go on a research tour of the southern Sudan and left for 3 months. So I was left holding the baby for 3 months. And during that 3 months, almost everything that was difficult that could go wrong went wrong. So I was really lucky. I had a fantastic nursing team, and the keepers were brilliant, and a very supportive set of zoo directors. And I was able to tackle everything and reasonably successfully. So that meant that when my boss came back, I was just, oh, you like the clinical work and the surgery, and you're very welcome. You can do it all. And he was interested in other things anyway. So I just ended up doing all the clinical work for the zoo.
Did you have to flip between Regent's Park and Whipsnade, or?
Yes, but mostly it was Regent's Park.
Yeah.
There was the director or curator, rather, at the time at Whipsnade was also a veterinary surgeon, so he did most of the work up there.
Mm.
And But it was a different sort of animal. The animals at London Zoo, at Regent's Park, were, a more varied collection. Up at Whipsnade, there were some carnivores, and most of the ungulates were up there at the time.
Yeah.
But we had some at Regent's Park as well.
But they do
Um,
transfer animals, do they, from one to the other?
They do, but it's particularly nowadays, animals are mainly put into the best place to keep them in. So
Yeah.
if they need a bigger space, then that bigger space isn't going to be available at Regent's Park. So when I was at Regent's Park, for instance, we had elephants. Soon after I left, they were all moved up to Whipsnade,
Mm.
which is a better environment for them. They had
Yeah.
some at Whipsnade before, but not very many.
And of course, they're in sort of meadow enclosures rather than being confined to smaller areas, aren't they?
Yes, they're more open. They can do more. The quality of life is better in some respects. But having said that, they were also very well looked after at London Zoo. I don't
Mm.
think their welfare necessarily suffered being at London Zoo at all. They were well looked after. But over time, ideas change, and it's important to keep up with how ideas change. And London Zoo has done that, and indeed many other zoos around the world are still doing that. And in 5 years' time, it will be different to what it is now, and so on.
Do you consider London Zoo to be one of the premier zoos of the world?
Yes, and it certainly was when I was there. It was in the top sort of 4 or 5.
Yeah.
If you and from a research point of view, because it wasn't just London Zoo, I was supporting the Institute of Zoology as part of the Institute of Zoology. So we had about 100 research scientists as well looking at different things. So I had to support those in different areas as well, which was good.
So after London, you moved on to Doha.
Yes, I was seconded to Doha by London. Um, that was they had built a new zoo with some guidance from London, but it needed to be established and sort of set on its way properly. And I was asked to go and do that task. So I became the manager for the Doha Zoo and did that for 4 years, which was very interesting. I liked working in the Arab world. Indeed, I stayed on afterwards in the Arab world for a little bit. But it was a great challenge to do it. completely different working environment. I went from having, a few people who I worked with to having to look after about 145, something like that.
Yeah.
And so it changed the way that I had to work, and it was a really good challenge for me, in the nicest way. It was good fun.
So what sort of animals can you have in Doha? Presumably not polar bears.
No, fortunately, we didn't have anything like that, but we had lions and
Yeah.
tigers and a range of antelope and rhinos and elephants and quite a giraffe and a whole range of different species,
So it was pretty
crocodiles and
interesting.
those sort of
Yeah.
things. Oh,
Yeah.
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 And, the job was there to sort of supervise the veterinary work, to manage the whole zoo, to train up staff. I was supported by a couple of three actually London Zoo staff who came out with me, and we got a really good zoo with very good reviews at the time going. So it became one of the leading zoos in the Middle East.
Okay. And from there you moved on to Saudi Arabia.
From there, I moved on to Saudi and set up a wildlife research centre in Saudi Arabia, um, which again changed what I was doing. I was sort of looking at conserving particularly the Arabian oryx um, and the Hubara bustard, which is a type of bird. But we're also looking at Arabian gazelle more widely and trying to set up healthy herds. If we take the Arabian oryx as an example, it died out in the wild. It was put back in the wild from captivity.
Wow.
The captive herds were um, had serious problems in many cases. The ones I were dealing with had a very high tuberculosis rate because they'd been kept on private farms and things like that, where they were looked after and treasured, but people didn't understand disease transmission and things like that. Not very well, anyway. So we had to try and clear the TB from all the surrounding animals, and particularly the Arabian oryx, which meant treating them at vast expense to get them healthy. And then you had to work out protocols for putting them back into the wild. So we developed a strategy where you would have to have at least one clear generation before you could start putting them back. So yes, it was good fun. We
So
looked at
yeah.
we looked at also getting the right sort of reserves and things. There were two centres in Saudi at the time, the one I was setting up and one that the French had set up. And so we worked on collaborating together. So on the Taif side, I was just outside of Riyadh. And so we worked collaboratively with the ministry on getting it set up. And the government put a huge amount of effort into it. They developed a sort of commission, and in that commission, they put all the most, well, not necessarily all, but a very large number of very senior princes to push it forwards, which made it also very interesting working from that point of view.
When you say it takes a generation to make sure that you've got rid of something like TB, what is a generation? 3 years, 4 years, longer?
No, a whole new generation of animals. So the the mothers who were infected, it infected very often the uterus of those animals.
Yeah.
So there was a risk it would be passed on to the babies.
Yeah.
So we made sure that neither the mothers nor their babies were put in the wild, but the babies of the babies, if it was an uninfected mother that the first baby became, then her baby could go on to the wild.
So a lot of close monitoring involved on
Very
this.
close monitoring. Yeah, very
Yeah.
close monitoring. A really important project for the government, and yes, it was a good challenge.
And, did the government have any reason other than sort of being inquisitive to actually get on with this sort of thing? Did they were they looking ultimately at trying to make a commercial zoo out of it?
Oh no, it was not a zoo. This was putting them back in the wild.
Yeah,
This was
sure. Mm,
looking for game reserves, game park areas,
yeah,
suitable areas to put them back into. And the idea was, as they had done in Oman and were sort of establishing in Oman, was to get it more widely across the Arab world.
yeah.
So now you have them back in the wild, and their numbers are building and that sort of thing, which is a very great, that's what one does it for. It's been a really good success. And the animals originated from private collections in the case of Saudi, but also sort of zoo animals in other parts of the world for similar species. So London Zoo contributed to the scimitar Wanderix going back into North Africa as well.
That's interesting. Now, eventually, you leave the Middle East and end up in Guernsey.
I do, yes, yes. I perhaps should mention that while I was in the Middle East, I also was, and also my latter part as the clinician at London Zoo,
Yeah.
I was working with World Wildlife Fund on giant pandas. So we also set up, or I was responsible for setting up the Wolong giant panda breeding program. So while I was working in the last years at London Zoo and in the Middle East, I was also popping backwards and forwards to China twice a year for the breeding season and the cubbing season. Make sure
That's why I described you as vet of the world. Well, what's the situation with giant pandas these days?
well, their numbers are at least stable and I think climbing.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're doing well, and the Chinese have put a huge effort in, as did World Wildlife Fund and some of the American zoos and others. Yeah, it's been a good success, and it's highlighted to a lot of people conservation because the giant panda was the logo of the World Wildlife Fund.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was, they were able to promote it, and it acted as what we call an umbrella species. So it's a high priority species which people want to support, and thereby you support a whole range of species and vegetation and habitats and so on underneath the label of supporting the giant panda. So lots of different things are supported at the same time.
There's a lot to be said for cuddliness. I know that you wouldn't probably want to cuddle one,
Absolutely.
but to actually see them, you get that feeling about them, don't you?
You do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What was the reason for their decline in the first place? Was it man-made or?
Yes, it's man-made in a sense, but human populations expand,
Yeah,
and in China they expanded hugely over a few hundred years, and they pushed the habitat back. So originally, pandas would have spread from the mountains on the edge of Tibet across to pretty much the coastline, going to the east and south down into probably Laos and places like that. But when we all got involved in it, they were limited to a mountain chain sort of just to the east of Chengdu. And that's where the efforts were concentrated.
they've been very political animals, haven't they? Up to a point, in terms of the fact the Chinese donate them to various countries. I think
Well,
didn't
they are.
Richard Nixon got hold of a couple, didn't he?
Well, they're signs of friendship,
Yes.
and they're good ambassadors for China.
Yeah.
They're great ambassadors for China. Um, and yes, giving that, well, they're usually rented, as it were. The Chinese do get a fee, which goes back into conservation for loaning them, and they can, at least initially, make a big difference to a zoo. People want to go and see pandas, and it gives the zoo and the country a lift. They are important, very important species.
What's the breeding rate like in captivity?
It is much better now because it's
Yeah.
better understood.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it was done with artificial insemination,
Hmm.
and that's one of the reasons I was sent, was because I'd done a lot of work with artificial insemination and a lot of work with anesthetizing giant pandas and so on, which at the time was supposed to be quite difficult, but it wasn't so bad. And so I went over to work with others and show them what we did and that sort of thing.
Okay, interesting stuff. So, working in parallel with vet care, you spend a lot of your spare time, don't you, elsewhere, looking after animals?
Yes, I when I came back to Britain, um, I came to Guernsey, and the idea was that I would come back and do my normal sort of veterinary work that everybody expects.
Hmm.
But I also continued to do my consultancy work. Um, and so I would go off every month or two and look at a project or move animals or design something for holding animals in. And for several years, I had a zoo and sanctuary design company with a colleague of mine who was the chief architect at London Zoo,
Right.
who left
Okay.
at about the same time as I did.
Yeah.
And so when we left, we thought, well, we'll set up a consultancy service. So on zoo management and zoo design and leisure facility design and things like that. So we did that for several years until he retired.
I mean, presumably a lot of the larger wild animals that you come across, there's not much documentation in terms of sort of saying in these circumstances you do this. Is that true?
No, that's fairly true. When I started, there wasn't. Um, there was a book which was translated from German, and there were a couple of books going back that were very, very basic. But there was really nothing very much at all. But over the years that I've been working with zoo and wildlife stuff, people have published a lot of papers. So, and there's some journals that come out. So if you subscribe to those, you get information. And now there's quite a lot of books on medicine of different species. So it's a very different picture today to what it was 45 years ago.
And do you indirectly contribute to this in terms of writing reports on various treatments?
Sometimes I've done a few scientific papers,
Yeah.
but no, I do quite a lot of mentoring, I suppose, still of colleagues around the world, and I do sort of honorary veterinary work for some sanctuaries as well. So the Zambian Primate Protection Society and the European Elephant Sanctuary. So yes, I do some of that still.
You're very active also with the White Lion Foundation, which I'd never heard of until I was looking through your CV and onto the website. Um, this is
Well,
a
I
this is a
have been, but
mutation, is it? Yeah.
I have to say that one I have actually just closed
Right.
because it was mainly me doing it,
Yes. Okay.
and I had a colleague who two colleagues who co-founded it with me. One of them retired, and the other one unfortunately passed away just over a year ago. So with that, we had very high standards of what we wanted to achieve. And I did the scientific side of it,
Yeah.
but the fundraising side and some of that side, not so much. So there wasn't a stream of money coming through, and also with COVID and other things, I had to concentrate on the practice and keeping the practice going.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those sort of things didn't really help with the White Lion Foundation going forward, unfortunately.
But as
So
far as
literally, I have
yeah.
only just closed it. So
Yeah. But okay, but you've had a lot of experience in that field. And
oh yes, yeah.
so they're found in South Africa?
Sorry,
That the white lions are found in South Africa?
they are, but they are a unique mutation that occurs very occasionally.
Okay.
Um, they're not like the white lions that most people come across, which unfortunately are inbred animals,
Yeah.
a bit like white tigers, and really shouldn't be kept going. They're not a different species. they're not there, but they are genetically severely hampered by inbreeding, and the sooner it stops, the better. But I fancy a lot of people try and sell them as special things which need support. They don't need support. They are a religious symbol to some people in their natural environment, as they occur so rarely,
Yeah.
and they have sort of particular significance in that situation, but not being inbred and bred for specifically. So you get these white cubs, and then generation after generation being bred for, and you get dreadful consequences of that.
Yeah, because I mean, this is what normally happens, doesn't it? With a lot of breeding, you can sort of create a situation where the animal, really suffers because of the way in
Uh,
which things
Indeed,
have taken place. Yeah,
if you look at giant panda, sorry, not giant pandas. If you look at white tigers,
yeah,
they have physical problems. They are nearly all cross-eyed. They have all sorts of problems going on with them, and it's very unfair that people keep these things going and encourage them going like that. Individually, they're obviously, they're an animal, and I want to treat them and make sure
yeah,
they're all right. But that doesn't mean to say that I want to support them. Indeed, the breeding of them should stop.
yeah, yeah. Coming back though to the white lions, they're sort of genetic mutation. Are they a bit like our blonde hedgehog here on
Yes,
Alderney?
the same sort of thing. They're not albinos.
No.
They're leucistic, so they are a white form because they lack the darker pigments.
Yeah, but they could be born with other cubs that are, deemed to be
They
normal.
yes, they probably would be born that way in the wild. I haven't seen a wild one. Um, they are really very rare, and
Yeah,
they only occur in parts of the Transvaal.
yeah.
But so that's why they're so significant.
Mm.
But that does not apply to the zoo animals that you see and the
No.
circus animals that you see and that sort of thing.
How do you look at elephant poaching? It's a big problem still, isn't it? Despite the fact that a lot of countries are putting resources in to try and cut back on it.
It's a dreadful problem, and there's an awful lot of work going on to try and stop it. There's a lot of support from countries, even that you might think, would have um, wanted ivory for various purposes. And most of them have now gone against ivory imports, but they still get through. There's individuals who want to collect it, and the trade needs to stop.
Yeah.
Anything that is sort of older than 71 is okay, in the sense that there were no laws covering it at that time. But since then, ivory shouldn't be moved.
And
Shouldn't 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 be collected.
no, of course not.
Mm.
Is there any way then to sort of be able to scientifically establish whether or
Oh
not it
yes,
was pre or post?
there is, and also you can now tell pretty much where the ivory originated from, because our genetic knowledge of elephants is so much better now.
Yeah.
So you can take a sample from a tusk and say, well, that came from Mozambique or from the Savo or West Africa or whatever. You can isolate them down into populations.
And it's a bit like rings on trees.
They grow bigger,
Yeah.
although because of the poaching, it's arguable that perhaps the bigger tuskers are not being born anymore. Yes, the animals adapt rather to poaching, and if you've got a big tusk, then you're more likely to be shot at. So, better not to be born with that possibility.
It's a great shame how we see the desecration of some species. Pangolins, for example, nice little
Uh,
horny anteater,
yeah, they're actually
declared a
lovely little
delicacy.
animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I've
Yeah.
only ever saw one. That was in the Okavango. And it just seems absolutely crazy that people sort of steal them to make money out of them.
It is completely crazy. I mean, they have their scales, which are supposed to have certain medical properties, which I don't believe they do. And they get poached in huge numbers. You're talking of probably hundreds of kilos of
Yeah.
scales at a time. It comes off lots and lots of animals. They're being decimated, and it's a dreadful situation, both in Asia and Africa. Mm.
And we sort of see the same problem with big cats wanting parts of their organs for Chinese medicine and stuff like that.
Oh, yes, we do, and
So how do you
again,
educate them,
they're
John?
indeed breeding them in farms for that
Yeah.
purpose, which is again, in my view, a disgusting development. But it's what has happened, has no conservation value whatsoever, and no useful medical effect either.
It's scary, isn't it, really? Because
Yeah.
as you say, it seems to me very difficult to get it over to people. Look, it's like rhino horn. It's the same as my fingernail.
Exactly, and it's compacted hair, and it's just you kill an animal to do it. I mean, and it's dreadful in the sense that for example, in Zimbabwe, they used to dart them and saw the horn off. But the trouble is, the poacher sees the footprint, is taking a big risk.
Yeah,
So very often he'll kill an animal, whether it's got a horn or not, to get the horn, because he doesn't want to be led up a false path by one that's not got a horn.
yeah. Yeah, it's bad that. How about Africa and the local farmers in conflict with the large animals? I mean, seen a few Attenborough things fairly recently where the elephants sort of decide to ravage the farm and this sort of thing.
They do, and it is a very serious problem. We have to remember that our farms and so on that's the family's livelihood
Mm,
and vital to the farm and to the family. But at the same time, it's elephants' land naturally, and the elephant doesn't understand that
yeah,
in most cases, and it's a very good source of food when his own environment is being compressed and depleted by people pushing up against it.
yeah.
So human animal conflict, whether it's with lions or elephants and other species as well, it is a real problem. Having said that, there are lots of techniques that are being developed. Some of them cost money, and most of them unfortunately cost money to do, but they are having very good results. So the building of bomas to help protect lions, and one of the White Lion Foundations was to build bomas in the Karakoram for snow leopards to protect
Hmm.
them, or protect the farmers' animals from being predated, and therefore reduce the need for them to be poached by the farmer. Um, with elephants, you've got sort of electric fences, you've got bees, you've got chili peppers, you've got all sorts of things that are being used to try and keep them out of sort of essential farmland,
And
and
I suppose
a
you
lot
can
of
use,
success.
yeah, I suppose you can use the sun, have solar powered electric fences.
You can, but they are quite high-powered electric fences,
Yeah, quite.
um, and your normal sort of horse fence won't do the job.
Right.
You need a higher voltage, and also animals are very clever. So they will elephants quickly learn to grab a pile of dry grass in their trunk, and then they can rip the fence down, or they'll put a foot against the post, which isn't electrified,
They,
and push it over. So these aren't, there are lots of ways that animals develop to
yeah,
get around
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah. We're running out of time, I'm afraid, but how do you see the future of world wildlife? You reasonably optimistic, or?
Yes, I am. I think, people really value having wildlife.
Mm.
For many countries in Africa, say, but elsewhere as well, it is a very significant part of their income through tourism of one sort or another. And so it's in their interest long term to conserve it.
Yeah.
There are short term interests for individuals, which sometimes trump the long term interests.
Yeah.
But hopefully, governments are going to be sensible. And increasingly they learn and know that they need to conserve their wildlife.
Yeah.
But there'll always be oil developments. There'll be the need to feed your country. There's all sorts of things that get in the way. But long term, I'm sure there are ways around it. There's a lot of really good people working in the field. There's a lot of great education going on. And there's really generous sponsorship from people to allow these projects to go ahead. So actually, I'm quite optimistic about it.
On that note of optimism, may I thank you very, very much for sparing me some time. Really
No,
enjoyed our
thank you
chat.
very much.
And
Thank you.
take care and wish you a happy Christmas. A little bit early, but
Yes, happy Christmas to you and to your viewers as well.
thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you.